Hello everyone, welcome to this month's Patreon voted review. Today's selection is Jamestown Plus, a game I've been aware of for a very long time, but a game I've been pleading the fifth on in terms of reviewing it on this channel, but the patrons have spoken and so I must follow through and give my review of the game. But before we start the review, I want to give a quick update on the custom shirt situation. So I got the test print of the shirt today. I think it looks absolutely awesome and I'm really happy with the quality of the shirt as well. It's not cheap, feels just right. The logo turned out fantastically, so I'm very excited for this. Keep an eye out over the next week because I'm gonna have a video all about this, because this shirt I'm actually selling direct to consumer. So this is coming from me to you, no middleman, no Amazon taking half the profits. But because of that, it's going to be a bit of a limited print and there is a minimum order size that I need to hit. So keep an eye out for all that information in a video coming up in the next week or so. So Jamestown Plus. In the comment section of this channel over the years, I've had a lot of people discuss this game and talk about how it was a great introductory shmup for them to get into the genre. And the reason why I haven't really wanted to discuss it on the channel is because I could just tell, I just sort of got a sense that I wouldn't really like this game all that much, and I didn't want to be that wet blanket in everyone's parade. Kind of why I don't review Cuphead on this channel, because I actually don't like Cuphead all that much, but I don't want to be that guy sort of thing. But since I have matured a bit as a reviewer over the past few years, I thought this is actually a great opportunity to dissect a shmup that I think does a lot of things right that other shmups in the genre aren't doing, but it's missing some core essentials in the gameplay department that I find a bit frustrating. So let's start with what this game does right and why I think it is as popular as it is, and deservedly so. The first thing that absolutely stands out about Jamestown Plus is the graphical presentation. This game looks beautiful. It looks great. It is a step above its indie shmup competition in a lot of ways when it comes to graphical presentation. Not only do the sprites and the sprite work look awesome and look polished and well done, but they have a lot of really rich details in the visuals. For example, in a recent episode of the Average Super Players Enjoy, they were talking about Maho, and Plasmo commented, and yes, I watched Average Super Players Enjoy, and Plasmo commented that he misses the days of Rising, because Rising would have all these fun background elements in their games that just aren't really present in today's shmups. Like they'd have little people running around on the ground, little creatures, little soldiers kind of cheering or running away, all that sort of stuff. And Jamestown Plus has this sort of thing. If you look at the first stage, for example, there's these British soldiers. I guess they're American in the West, but let's just call them redcoats. They've got some redcoats out in the bottom of the screen and they're running around, and they actually do interact with the gameplay a little bit, and there's a part where they shoot the enemies and stuff. All those little sort of details go a long way towards making this game stand out graphically. And I think if it comes to the success of this game, I think whoever did the graphics for Jamestown Plus is carrying this project on his back, because I think that is its #1 selling point, and I can't really fault it anywhere. Everything I think is just fantastic in terms of the way the game looks. Even the Dodonpachi style laser of the beam ship looks awesome. It looks cooler than Dodonpachi's own laser. So visually, I think they knocked it out of the park. A ton of little details on your ship, the way your ship moves. There's little animations to everything. This guy, the graphical design of this game is excellent, and I think more indie shmups could learn a lot of lessons from this game's graphics, and they really do remind me of something Rising would come up with. So I'd say that is the game's strongest point. The second strongest point of Jamestown Plus, in my opinion, is the way it's sort of formatted for newer players, in that it isn't following the traditional shmup design necessarily of being an arcade style game. Instead, what it has is it has this sort of story progression, but unlike something like Death Smiles, which has sort of a false overworld, this game has a much more true overworld. And in fact, when you first interact with Jamestown, you're not playing it in an arcade style run. Instead, you're playing it stage per stage, and then you have to beat the stages to advance to the next stage, like you do in traditional platformers or something like that. And I think this formula is very intriguing, and I think it works well for casual new players. It allows a level of progression in the game that you don't normally get in full-on arcade-style games, where either the players are getting stuck in the early stages or they're credit feeding their way through. So I think the way the level progression, the stage select, and then of course the unlockables, the ship upgrades, all the different ship types, all the different things you can use your gold and score to purchase and unlock. I think all of those are really great choices, and sort of a reason why I ended up having to play the game for 10 or 12 hours. I didn't want to, but because of the unlocking system, I was kind of forced to for the reason of the review, and also because I had that one last hope that maybe one of these ships would be the magic button to make the game fit my style of play a little better. I never did quite end up finding something like that, but I do like the idea of having these unlocks, and I do think that is something newer players will really gravitate to and really enjoy. And also in that regard, the amount of stages, the amount of content. The game has a lot of stages, but it's impressive because it manages to have a good amount of stages, but they are distinctive. You can remember which ones are which. They're pretty well designed in comparison to one another. Overall, there's some issues with the game design. We'll talk about that later. But as far as stage to stage, there's a nice sense of progression and difficulty. So all that stuff is really good. And then, of course, the big selling point that I can't fault, but I think may or may not convince you to get the game, which is the multiplayer aspect of the game. So this is a 4-player shmup, which is pretty unique. And you could tell this game was really built with that in mind. And I think that makes the game suffer a little bit in the single-player side of things. But as far as multiplayer, there's no doubt that this is probably one of the funnest shmups around to fire up and play with your friends, co-op local, because the game was clearly designed for that. And in fact, there was a run, I believe in either Shmup Slam 3 or Shmup Slam 4, where a group of players in Germany, Core Gamer Treff, I think was the group, got together and did a 4-player run for the event, and it was a lot of fun, and you could tell they were having a lot of fun. And I remember that this game was an entry point for about 2 or 3 players on that team who had never played shmups before. So it does really succeed in that regard, and I would say it is one of its strongest selling points outside the presentation and the visuals. Soundtrack-wise, I'm not a huge fan of this game's soundtrack. I don't think it's bad or anything, and I do get the vibe that they're going for and the style that they're going for. I just don't think it quite brought the heat as much as I would have liked. Some people might really like the soundtrack, though I wasn't a fan of it. But overall, visuals, soundtrack, game design, like on paper, are all really solid. And in fact, if I were to describe Jamestown Plus in a nutshell, I would say that it is like the classic example of a game design course A+. Like basically, if you went to college, and I believe there are some game design courses in college, I know because I've watched YouTube videos of them back in the past, and they sort of lay out the concepts of what's good game design. Jamestown Plus would get a really good grade from its instructor because on paper it's doing a lot of things right, especially if you're not super familiar with the genre of shmup. However, if you were to turn this game into a shmup professor, maybe like a Japanese shmup professor, that is where a lot of the game's flaws start to show through. And from what I understand, this was a game made by a studio who aren't necessarily that into shmups. Of course, it is a shmup and they cared enough to make it, but from what I understand, I don't think they have any plans to make another shmup in the future, and I'm not sure how in-depth their shmup knowledge is from the past. I kind of get the sense that this was a group of very talented game designers who got together and said, you know, everyone's doing platformers, let's do something different, let's do something unique. Why don't we make a shmup, right? But I don't get the sense that the team was all that familiar with the genre, and I'm saying that to lead into the criticisms I have with this game, which are mostly on sort of the shmup basics sort of level. The first one that I'm going to bring up, that if you've been following my reviews shouldn't be a big surprise, is once again the aspect ratio of the game. So this is a vertical, which means that it's scrolling vertically, but the aspect ratio, the layout of the screen, is horizontal. And so you don't have those cropped sides like you get, and of course you can't rotate it sideways and get that nice 3:4 aspect ratio or whatever it is. This is very great for, again, like a commercial style game. All that wasted screen space doesn't seem to make sense, right? And so why don't we just use the full screen and just have you go up vertically? Well, the problem with that when it comes to shmups is the level design and the layout, and you have to make certain adjustments to make this work. And there's some things you can do. So one thing that Jamestown does do that I think is smart is they make the enemies bigger. They make the bullets bigger. They increase the size of everything. The ship, the enemies, the bullets, everything is a bit bigger than what you'd normally get in a traditional vertical scrolling shmup. And they did that to scale the game more correctly. However, the problem with having this massive horizontal widescreen aspect ratio is your side to side and vertical movement, where basically you have much more lateral space than you do vertical space. So you spend much more of your time moving side to side. Much more of the dodging is going to take place side to side. You're not going to be moving forward and around things all that often. Instead, you're going to be moving around them basically horizontally. And so this changes how you lay out your levels, how you lay out your boss patterns, how you lay everything out. And this is where Jamestown really struggles when you're playing in single player mode, because you get into a situation with a lot of the level design where your ship speed is pretty damn slow. And in fact, all the ships are pretty slow moving considering how much space you need to cover. Even the faster moving ships in the game aren't really that fast. And then when you add the concentrated movement speed on top of that, I mean, you can get absolutely crawling at times. The game does certain things to sort of mitigate this, but overall, I think the level design, because of this aspect ratio choice, can get pretty sloppy. And then another aspect that really makes this an extra problem is that the game does not cut off the enemy fire as early as it should. In most shmups, when the enemies get to about the bottom fourth of the screen, they're basically unable to fire at you anymore, or they stop firing. And the reason why this is done is so that you don't get any situations where enemies pass by you and then snipe you on their way out of the screen. This is something that would be an absolute nightmare in a lot of bullet hells. But in Jamestown, this addition is not included. Enemies will fire at you from the very bottom of the screen. They will continue firing all the way until they're off screen and despawn. And so you can get yourself into some really ridiculous situations where if you get cornered, and the game doesn't have a bomb system, by the way, so you get yourself cornered, then you have enemies at the bottom of the screen firing at you. You got enemies at the top of the screen firing at you. You got the enemies on the other side of the screen firing at you. You get absolutely pitted into a corner. And really, a lot of the time, the best solution in these situations is just to stand your ground in that corner. You can get sort of trapped in these corners for long periods of the gameplay until you get enough Vaunt for invulnerability or something like that. But they really should have stopped the enemies from firing so low on the screen. Another basic issue with the gameplay is that it does not appear that there is any bullet ceiling on the grounded enemies. So props to them for including grounded enemies in the game. That's very good. Grounded enemies, for people not familiar with that term, are enemies like tanks or things walking on the ground that you can fly over, but they can still shoot bullets at you. The tank is a classic example of this type of enemy. And so what normally happens with these enemy types in bullet hells is that you can do what's called bullet ceiling, which means that you fly over the top of them, and once you're within a certain proximity, they won't fire. You're kind of holding them down, suppressing their fire by just sitting there. And that's a very important technique for a lot of bullet hell games, and how you're able to manage a lot of these ground enemies mixed with air enemies. But the problem with Jamestown is that it doesn't appear that there's bullet ceiling. There's a lot of places where if there is bullet ceiling, it's very limited or very iffy, because there's lots of times where I'll be flying over grounded enemies and they'll just fire and shoot me and kill me. So it's like, okay, that technique's out the window. And then another big problem with this game is the ship balance. So Jamestown Plus has all these different ships you can unlock and choose from, and you can change the weapon types on some of the ships, and you can do all these cool different things. And on paper, this seems really awesome. And I think the idea was to give you all these different combinations that you can mix together, especially when you're playing multiplayer. Most of the ships in the game are underpowered, in my opinion. They feel very underpowered, and you can sort of end up in Euro shmup territory where you're just doing everything you can, but you feel like you're just flying a little pea shooter. You're barely doing any damage. You're barely able to control the enemies on screen. They just live forever. And so it feels like there's a few ships on this game that are just really powerful, and just play those, right? Like the beam ship, the gunner ship, the one that can kind of turn and shoot things. And then if you get real creative, there's this ship that you can add the laser drop, and then some options that follow you around. That seems pretty solid. And some of the ships on the right side of the screen seem pretty solid. But overall, it just feels like that beam ship is just the way to go as far as killing power and overall utility. I think the game focused a little bit too heavily on the multiplayer when it came to the overall ship balance. And then just one last comment. On the Switch, this game did feel particularly laggy. I didn't feel like firing up the input lag setup this time around because my time schedule is really tight this week. But just playing, even on a really low latency setup, it felt like this game was pretty damn sluggish. I wouldn't be surprised if it had a really high amount of input lag. And I played it on Legendary mode. And the reason why I played it on Legendary mode is because the game wants you to play it on Legendary mode. And so this is sort of my new standard for reviews, where I play the intended difficulty mode. And since the game explicitly makes you play on Legendary mode to unlock everything, that's sort of the intended mode, in my opinion. And it's not that the game is a bad shmup necessarily, but it feels like it has some real unpolished sort of Euro shmuppy type elements that I think hold it back. And I would love to see, though, in the future, a follow-up to this game. Not a Jamestown plus DX triple X. I mean something like Jamestown 2, where they went in and they sort of reworked the way the aspect ratio worked, reworked the ship speeds a little bit, reworked the level design, added in bullet ceiling, made ships stop firing before they hit the bottom of the screen, you know, all these sort of little basics. They went in there and tuned it up and polished it up, because I think the studio definitely has a lot of talent and a lot of really great ideas. And I think a lot of these ideas, as far as the visual presentation, the overall design of how the game works, were really smart and something a lot of shmups could learn from. But overall, do I recommend it? For single player, no. But if you're interested in multiplayer and you want to play with your friends and you want to do like a 4-player co-op thing, or have friends come over and just casually play, I think that's where the game really shines. And so in that regard, I can recommend it. But for the solo players out there, I don't think it's quite there, at least in my opinion. But thanks so much for tuning in, and once again, keep an eye out for the shirt video coming up soon, because I'm really looking forward to getting this out to everyone. Please like, subscribe, tell your friends. Check out the Electric Underground Reddit, by the way. That's probably one of the mechanisms I'm going to use with the shirt sales and everything. So thanks so much. Adios, everyone.
So thank you to the $5 patrons: 100, Dingo, Another Joe, Anthony A, Anthony Iodice, Aaron Solis, Asa Davis, Ben, Borgie22, Brian Shiver, Chris Yusufovich, Chronic Burnout 3, Cook Some Soup, Corey Mark, Des Audio, Darren Griffin, Delta Tango 6, Disco Staslaya, DJ420 Praise It, Eric H, FCK, Full Set, Retro Schmupper, Hausu, Kiwi, JLab, JB RPG, Jim Knockham, Joe Angelo, John Kelly, Jolts, Gameboy Guru, K, K2, Kikoman 589, Larridge, Malaise, Mark Toms, Maz, Megadeth 859, Minong, Mechalin, Michelle Y, Queen Charlene, Nathaniel Davis, and Electron, Neon Dagger Games, Okla Kugels, Philip Mason, Portal 63, Radocat, Raul, Realskeen, Riff Mason, Rolf015, Scanline City, Seesaw STG, 7 Overdose, Shane Sinjensky, Shmup Junkie, SLW, The Boot Rex, The Real Ikuzo, The Dirty Screech, The Old Bensta, TRM, Sugumo, Plasmo, Twilight EX, Utakaya. Thanks so much.